Welcome back to Radio Entrepreneurs. I'm Jonathan Freedman. Our next guest up is Walter Foster, partner of Eckert Seamans. Welcome to Radio Entrepreneurs.
Thank you. Good morning.
Great. It's a pleasure to have you on. And you've got a topical discussion for us this morning, something you wanted to talk about, mandatory vaccinations in the workplace.
Yes. So, I think it's a topic if not at every breakfast, lunch, and dinner right now, but yes.
Absolutely, and we could probably skip the whole backstory of what got us here, but it's fascinating to me that we saw a very slow reaction. And I was just talking to a former guest, or a prior guest, I should say, not former, but a prior guest about this. That it seems as though everything started at the federal government, the expectation they're going to put everything in place, and then that got kicked down to the state level and governors. Let them put masks, then let them decide things. A couple of forward-thinking industries or frontline industries, sort of put business now puts the regulations in place. And so where are we? We're sort of at a place where I think some businesses now, some governments have caught on and said we're gonna mandate. So it seems like we're in that messy space of nobody knows who's responsible. Some forward-thinking companies are taking it upon themselves. Tell us from your perspective.
Sure. That's a great overview. I think this is exactly historical that has led us to this point that's been happening. And under the title of "It's a Work in Progress," that's where we find ourselves. And so the federal government can only go so far. We're obviously being, at least hopefully, informed by science, but most private employers have been hopeful in deferring, that the pandemic is handled at a much larger level. And what's really occurring is with the Delta variant coming up and what we thought would be somewhat a return to normal, where we're in really another surge, if you will, but of a different type. And unfortunately, private employers are dealing with, it's been a year and a half, right. And not everybody can go remote. So, retail businesses and the like, of course, any healthcare industry, nursing homes, restaurants, there really isn't such a thing as going entirely remote, where many other industries there are. So what you're seeing is grappling where we think it's on its way out, but we're dealing with, really a kind of a crisis in terms of the amount of people in hospitals or going and being able to spread it. So we're seeing the typical protocols come back, but what is now square front and center is whether private employers mandate vaccines or how they handle that to, again, minimize the spread, but largely so that they can remain open. It's like teetering on, instead of quarantining your entire workforce again and shutting down, how do we keep it going with protocols and a process in place, knowing that and I'm going to talk about Massachusetts first because it's a highly vax state, but if you have a national based company, you're dealing with, locations in every state across the country.
Right, and as I was talking with a prior guest, I used an example that I came across where an employer in Massachusetts, exactly to your point, 70, 80 employees, and they put out a mandate, and they had a handful of people that push back. Well, what happens when you put out that mandate and 40% of your workforce pushes back, or 60% of your workforce pushes back in other parts of the country? So, I think it's probably off-used, but really the case here, we're in uncharted waters. And it seems to me that employers are sort of left, the buck stops with them, and they've got to make decisions. So how do we handle those uncharted waters and do it properly from an employment perspective?
No direct answer, but as you can imagine, in an incremental way. So what we're seeing amongst our clients and what we've seen, so I'm going to give you the example of course, it was highly publicized, CNN says mandatory vaccines, didn't have it, you're fired, right? We call that a zero tolerance policy. But most employers are opting for something in between. And what we're seeing is that most employers are saying yes, because you have every right to ask, are you vaccinated? You still have what I call the OSHA obligation, right? To keep a workplace that is supposed to be safe and so that you can work. And there's a business interest to make sure the business keeps going. So you don't want people out sick. So most employers are asking if people are vaccinated. And
can I stop you on that one, Walter?
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it seems to me that there's potential there that, and this may be gray again, is where does HIPAA start and stop as far as that? Is that not protected health information? Because that's one of those gray areas again, right?
It is. So both because out of the necessity, we have guidance both from OSHA and from the EEOC that is absolutely fine to ask if somebody is vaccinated, because it's about a status. It's not really about a disability per se. And it's not what you would call, an intimate medical record. The answer is, though, it still is medical information about that individual. And so employers must keep that private. They can't go and say, oh, Walter Foster, company X, got the vaccine. They can't share that. But they do that all the time. When you get a doctor's note saying, I'm going for, and sometimes people put, I'm going for my cancer treatment. I need these next 3 days off. Company knows that. It's all HIPAA protected. You just don't share it with anybody else. So that part, at least.
So those in a need to know, HR, senior leadership has the duty or the right to know, as you point out, as long as they protect that information.
That's
don't
correct.
Spread it. Don't publicize.
That's correct.
Got it. Okay, that clarifies at least one area.
No, there's lots of ground rules here, and so it flows from like, okay, how do we actually do that? So that's the first step. But what we're seeing is, instead of just firing people if they're not, we're seeing what I call an incremental policy that is adapted to a workforce that's not 100% vaccinated. So what the most recent ones that I've seen, and where a number of employers are going, is, okay, if you're not, so just say it's 20 or 40% of your workforce that is not, what they'll say is that typically, if you can do remote work, continue to do that. So that's one safety valve, right? Yep. Another safety valve is a ramp up time. It's giving people like 75 days to opt to get in. So I call it's the reluctant group that's on the fence. We have our hard and fast, right? People who are like, for whatever reason. Plus, there are exemptions, even under the law, under the EEOC, for discrimination purposes, for deeply held religious beliefs or because of a medical condition. So what most are doing is that if you fall into the unvaccinated for whatever reason, you must follow these protocols. So there's often more protocols imposed, and what I'm seeing around those protocols, not the least of which is masking and or distancing, the typical protocols that unfortunately we now know like the back of our hand. What I am seeing is that some employers are saying you have to go get tested twice a week to let us know that you're not infected, and
at
then,
your expense, at the employee's expense.
Right. And there's a couple of states that don't allow that. There's a couple of states with state laws that are saying, hey, if you're mandating that somebody go do that or, to comply, it's up to you. The question there is, if there's a free vaccine and there's no legal reason for not taking the vaccine, why would the employer have to pay for that where the vaccine is free and available? So that's one of the questions. But there are employers who are saying, no, go get tested at your own expense, take all the precautions. Others are saying, stay at home, for continue to do remote work. But let's take the example of those who can't do remote work all the time. Yep. What we're seeing is essentially they say, that's fine. You will become an inactive employee and you're welcome to come back anytime. They're not, quote unquote, firing or terminating, but they're suspending people without pay. And so effectively, it's like, okay, that really is, you've lost your job, at least for that period of time. What I think a number of employers are doing is looking down the road in a 6-month time frame when perhaps this surge and or hopefully no further variants come out, but that we actually get on top of this, right? Hope springs eternal. But they're looking to, if you will, continue to kick the can down the road, but knowing that it's a percentage of the workforce now. And so I think most are kind of trying to make do to accommodate those within their workforce that are not ready and or refuse to get a vaccine for whatever reasons.
So it would seem to me a common principle in employment law is applies here, which is as long as you put a policy in place, treat everybody the same. In other words,
Yes.
Whatever you're doing, do it consistently across your organization.
Correct.
And I've seen situations where people, well, maybe we'll make an exception. No. Once you make exceptions, you've now opened up, the can of worms, so to speak.
You do. It's a great rule of thumb. Absolutely.
And then I guess the second one is, and maybe it's the crystal ball. Are we going to see challenges? Are we going to start to see larger challenges about the ability of employers to mandate? Are we going to see? I mean, I suspect we will see litigation at some point, whether it's mass litigation or individuals. Again, hard to sue your employer, but it happens all the time for wrongful termination. So I'd imagine we're gonna see an uptick in terms of that going on as well in the marketplace at some point.
We are, and there have been a few, as there are a few what I call test cases or individuals who are bringing those. The litigation, as you know, takes forever, right? So there's no quick answer. And ultimately, what those litigations are going to involve is the weighing of various legal factors. One of them, of course, is like, let's take a restaurant as an example, or take any other kind of business that has lots of people that need to be on the premises. There is a premises liability risk for any employer that says, wait a minute, your customer comes in and says, you didn't test your employees, they came and fed me food, or they did X, Y, and Z. I got it at your shop. And as a result, unfortunately, X person died, either in my family or me or my next of kin, because I got it at your place. And so there are those litigations that will come out too. So our system is, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you look at it, as a common law system, is built on those test cases, like probing around the edges. And I do expect to see those. And I think that what you may see is differences between, for instance, like Mass General has a mandatory vaccine policy. I think most people would want to feel like, if I'm going to the hospital because I have something wrong with me, let's just take a non-COVID person. You do want the people who are the nurses and
Treating you, caring for you, right?
Yeah, not to have it. Think of it
sort of a baseline expectation, you would hope.
You would think, and I think that there's, for most, and I'm sure there's always an exception out there, but I would say most reasonable people see that as a common denominator. So let's go to the next one, nursing homes. In fact, on the federal level, President Biden announced, for nursing homes, you can now mandate, where before you couldn't. So we're seeing a switch come because the societal issues of stopping this in its tracks, but also the health risks are so great that they're outweighing those other interests. I think at the end of the day, the litigations will be looking at that, but we won't have that answer. And there'll be a couple of courts that will go one way, one or two that will go the other, and they'll go all the way up. And in about 2 years, we'll have our answer on that. But in the meantime,
wow. It's going to be a bumpy road to figure it out, as with many things. I think the key word that you use there is, two key words: most reasonable people. And then, the more we see it, the more we look at it, the less reasonable people there seem to be in this country. But that's a whole other discussion.
I know.
So, Walter Foster, partner of Eckert Seamans, wonderful to have you on Radio Entrepreneurs. If people want to get in touch with you and talk about these matters or others even further, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Sure, they can reach me at eckertseamans.com, our website, and you can email me at wfoster@eckertseamans.com. And thanks for having me on, John.
Walter, it's been a real pleasure. You're listening to Radio Entrepreneurs. Our guest has been Walter Foster, partner of Eckert Seamans, and we'll be right back with another segment on Radio Entrepreneurs.